Come on, talk to me. You can see what's going on. Yeah, what's going on? Tell me what's going on. I'll tell you what's going on. Ooh. Right on. Right on. Right on.
This land is your land. This land is my land. From California, well, to the New York Island. From the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. I tell you, this land was made for you and me. As I went walking down that ribbon of a highway, I saw the music.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 5th Annual Inland Empire Anti-Racist Summit. I'm Janice Roots. I'm the Executive Director for the Center Against Racism and Trauma. And we are very, very happy today to have you all here and to be able to be with the incredible Dr. Angela Davis. So first of all, I want to thank our sponsor, the Inland Empire Community Foundation. We can't do this kind of work without the support of many people, and the Inland Empire Community Foundation has been a supporter over these last 5 years and continues to be one of the premier foundations in the region, the Inland Empire region. I would also like to thank my community partners, which are also very, very important to us. We don't work in a vacuum. None of us can do this work alone. And so without the community partners you see here, CART cannot do the work we have to do across the region on anti-racism and racial healing. So CART is the Center Against Racism and Trauma. And we work to inform and support the fight against all kinds of racism across the Inland Empire, San Bernardino and Riverside counties. We do have sometimes our own kinds of campaigns that we run, but we do a lot of community organizing. We have a Youth Power Collective program where we have teams of high school students who we help train in community organizing techniques and practices, and help them address changes in their communities and schools. And we do the same thing in support of organizations around the region that have anti-racism as their objective. And we're here to support those organizations like Antiracist Riverside. We work in collaboration also with the NAACP, And we're currently running a collaborative effort to do school complaint training around the region, as well as listening sessions, because we're finding that there's a lot of racism and hate crimes going on in schools from elementary school through high school. And we have to stop this. So it's very important for us to do this kind of work and to collaborate with a variety of partners. We also do training. Recently, we have been training with RAP Foundation, another great supporter of the Center Against Racism and Trauma. And those are leadership and equity types of trainings that are going on. There's going to be another one, I believe, in Indio, and also one in Riverside. So stay tuned for those kinds of things coming about. We do other kinds of training, and we are working on putting together racial healing circles, as well as racial healing workshops and retreats. And we're in 2026, start looking forward to an annual racial healing that we hope to be outdoors and have a plethora of Indigenous practices. So we're really looking forward to doing that and to having maybe many of you involved. Tonight with me as well, our moderator who will be fielding the questions from you, the audience, for Dr. Angela Davis, is Yvette Dubel. And Yvette was a progressive homeschooling parent who grew into an artist, researcher, author, social entrepreneur, and founder of Empowered Innovation Alliance, which is focused on addressing systemic inequities through creative, trauma-informed strategies. She is the creator of the Empowered Innovation System, which uses to advance art-based personal innovation. With over 2 decades of experience, Yvette specializes in visionary solutions, and she enjoys life with her husband of over 34 years and their fur babies. And I've met her fur babies, and they're wonderful. But she is very dynamic, has a lot to offer, and will be a great facilitator of our panel this evening, which we're very proud to have as well. It includes Dylan Rodriguez, professor at UC Riverside, Marilyn Grohl-Brisk, a professor at Pitzer College, and Vonya Quarles, co-founder and executive director of Starting Over, but also recently started this incredible land trust for the region, and I think it's going to be something spectacular. So innovation is abounding. Right now, I would like to start a video that I think is very important to what's going to go into my introduction of the iconic Dr. Angela Davis. And so if my tech team, my fabulous tech team of April Gillis and Selena Mikes could start that would be great.
One of the things that I've been thinking about a great deal lately is the prison system. Actually, I've been thinking about the prison system for a long, long time. I ended up in jail because of the work that I was doing around the prison system in California back in the late 60s, when we were very angry that such vast numbers of people like George Jackson, who was a brilliant thinker, strategist, who at age 18 had been convicted of stealing or being involved with some guys who stole $70 from a gas station. At age 18, he was sentenced to from 1 year to life by the California Youth Authority, which meant that he could have gotten out after 1 year, but at the same time, by the same token, he could have spent the rest of his life in prison. As it turns out, he did spend the rest of his relatively short life in prison. He was killed some 12 years after he was incarcerated. Many of us who were doing work around the case of the Soledad brothers and other political prisoners from the Black Panther Party, other political organizations began to realize, especially as a result of the work that we were doing with George Jackson, that the prison system as a whole served as a weapon of political repression, racist repression, affecting not only those who were incarcerated for explicitly political reasons, but the majority of the people who were there, who virtually all of whom were poor. I mean, how many rich people are there in prison? A few here and there. And there still are those sort of country club prisons reserved for them. But the vast majority of people are poor people. And a disproportionate number of those poor people were and continue to be people of color, people of African descent, Latinos, Native Americans.
So I believe that was from 1970. The fire and ability to talk to and move people toward activism obviously was there then, still exists now. And it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Angela Davis. But many, many, many people obviously call her Angela Davis. She has been working in this social justice, racial justice, environment for many decades now, and has gone through many cycles of things and experienced incarceration personally, and is both an activist and an educator at the university level and the public square, always emphasizing the importance of building communities of struggle for economic, racial, and gender justice. And so, she has taught at, or, her teaching career, professorial career has, taken her through San Francisco State University, Mills College, UC Berkeley, UCLA, Vassar, Syracuse University, the Claremont Colleges, and Stanford University. And spent quite a bit of time at UC Santa Cruz, now a distinguished professor emeritus of history of consciousness. And I'm sorry I was not able to take that course, but if you offer it again, I might find a way to. An interdisciplinary PhD program and of feminist studies as well. She's written 10 books. You're probably thinking of writing another one or in the middle of it now, who knows? And lectured all over the United States and Europe, and spent quite a bit in Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia, South America, just the Arctic and the poles you haven't been to do this work, but everywhere else. And so she founded Critical Resistance, a national organization dedicated to dismantling the prison industrial complex. And she's affiliated with Sisters Inside, an abolitionist organization based in Queensland, Australia. It works for solidarity with women in prison. And there really is so much more from, for our purposes here, I definitely read, Our Prison's Obsolete, but also wanted to know more about your life history, and so your autobiography as well. And there's so much more. And I wish we could talk about everything about you during this, little bit of time we have here this evening. However, we will definitely try to get to, some really critical things with you and just learn about you and get some inspiration and some fire as well. And so I want to welcome, thank, and let you know that we are honored to have you, Dr. Angela Davis.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this very important anti-racist summit. I understand it's the 5th anti-racist
Yes,
summit in
yes,
of the Inland Empire,
yes.
and
So,
I'm I want to congratulate you for doing this work, which is especially important at this moment. It would be important at any moment, but especially given the circumstances that surround us and threaten to engulf us with fascism at this moment.
right. Yeah, yeah. Scary, scary stuff. I definitely, well, thank you very much. I knew that after the election, regardless of who won, that our work would
Yeah.
increase, right? One way or another, it was going to increase. And seeing what's happened has been crazy. And I'm actually going to skip to something because you brought up the issue around fascism. And I had a friend earlier this week say to me, maybe because we have a local organization called Anti-Racist Riverside that just deals with the city of Riverside. And she said, maybe you should call it Anti-Fascist Riverside, right? You might get more people. And I know that, there was a point in time where it was, I was reading and you said, certainly there was a definite relationship between racism and fascism. If a full-blown fascism ever erupted in the United States, it would certainly ride on the back of racism in much the same way that anti-Semitism provided the handle for German fascism in the 30s. So do you think we're looking at that now?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that um, as we watch the efforts to tear down the vestiges of democracy in this country and the assaults on immigrants, assaults on every single community of color that exists in this
Right.
country, it's very clear. Uh, and the there is an effort to take us back to a time when, as a matter of fact, some of the most racist experiments in the world were based on the system of racial segregation in the US. Apartheid South Africa, for example.
Hmm.
But that is precisely the backwards, retrogressive historical direction the current occupant of the White House wants to take us in, along with his billionaire oligarchs.
Yes. Crony. Yeah, oligarchs is
Mhm.
exactly it, right. Um, I wonder, is there something like recently that sticks out for you, and maybe is sort of an indicator of portents to come, or something that you think we really need to focus on or have people focus on about what's going on and through this administration?
Mhm. Well, we certainly can't capitulate to the efforts to tear down all of the victories that we've won in recent years. If we do that, then of course there's no possibility, there's no hope.
Right.
Uh, I guess I would say I want us to remember
Mhm.
that Trump was elected not so much because there was overwhelming support, however misguided that support might be
Right. Right.
in the country, but rather because so many people did not go to the polls, so many people did not vote. Um, As a matter of fact, more people stayed at home than voted for either candidate. And I say this, both to express dismay at the fact that people did not vote, but of course I
Right,
understand why they didn't, because many of them felt strongly about the war in Gaza, for example, and
right, right,
solidarity with the Palestinian people, and of course in both cases, there was no positive outlook for ending the
right,
war on the people of Gaza and on the Palestinian people more broadly. So I would say we have to remember that his administration does not have the support of the majority of people in this country. And as a
right,
matter of fact, given what has happened over the last several months, there are those who voted for him who are very angry and very upset
right,
now.
right, right,
I don't want us to feel as if we are outnumbered in terms of
right,
how many we are who have a vision for a different future. Keep that
right,
in mind. And also keep in mind that they're they're no more than a few years, and in terms of historical time, that is but a drop in the bucket. But at
right,
the same time, we acknowledge how drastically things can change within a short period of time. We saw the damage that was done to the federal court system the last time around.
right, right, right.
Um, but I think it's really important for us not to give up and
Okay.
and to continue to do the work of organizing people.
Right,
Unfortunately, so many people are just grumbling around the dinner table, or maybe people don't meet around as much around the dinner table as
right.
they used to.
The
But you know what
TV now,
yeah,
whatever.
you know what I'm talking about.
I do. Yeah,
And there's not necessarily an outlet for a collective uh, protest
right,
that we certainly see that there is a basis for in this country.
right, right,
Uh, and let's remember, um, we can never really predict the turn of events.
right,
No one would have predicted that during his last term, that we would experience the largest demonstration in the history of the country, and
right, right,
that people would become so passionately anti-racist.
right, right,
That was not something any of us, I think, imagined. Uh, but we had a chance to see that huge numbers of people in this country have been affected by the organizing work, and you
right.
know by groups such as the organizers of the Inland Summit Against Racism.
I,
I mean, these kinds of projects have happened all over the country.
right,
And the demonstrations that brought out more people than ever before in the history of this country bore witness to the fact that people had changed.
right,
Now, I know that that was a moment, and here in the US, we don't tend to take history seriously,
right,
uh, because that is the ideological character of the US, to pretend that
right,
everything is in the present, right? Nothing
right,
is important except what is happening now. Uh,
right,
but I think we understand how we are all shaped by history, and that many of these important changes are not going to go away simply because he was elected to the presidency.
right, right, right. Yeah. For sure. Yeah, this is a very chaotic time, and lots of people are anxious, and there are protests against, the Doge, and there are things like that going on all the time. But in organizing work, we have to have a demand on the table if we're going to go out there and start, telling, in the street protesting, we need to make sure we know what we're asking for. So I know I'm jumping around, but I really want to make sure we get, the 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 carceral conversation on the table. Because no matter what, one of the things that could worsen, as if it's not bad enough, is that, more people protesting means more opportunities to harm people, to incarcerate people, to, just let the police state do what it likes to do. And so you've been fighting that. You've um, helped found critical resistance, um,
Along with
trying to,
Dylan Rodriguez, I should point
along with
out.
Dylan Rodriguez, and the prison industrial complex is, got rooted and has its tentacles in many different places and ways. And so, what is it that critical resistance, the organization and people are doing around the country, even around the world, um, to try and dismantle this system?
Well, when I think back to that period when we were attempting to bring people together from across the country, and to a certain extent, people from other countries as well, who were doing radical work against the carceral system,
Right,
who were not, satisfied with a reform here and there, but who
right,
were trying to understand the relationship of this vast prison system
mhm,
to our struggles against systemic racism,
right,
structural racism. As a matter of fact, I think that one of the major contributions that George Jackson made. And thank you
mhm,
for that opening. And I myself, I can't remember just listening to myself
right,
when that
right,
talk happened. But but I can confirm that George was one of the very first people who asked us to think more deeply about this practice of incarcerating ever larger numbers of people, especially from communities of color. Uh,
right,
Many of us had been involved in many campaigns to free political prisoners. And of course, you know, I I went to jail because of my involvement
right,
in the campaign to free the Soledad brothers.
right,
Uh, and George understood that there was something more than simply freeing political prisoners. He understood the that there was a structural relationship between uh, the incarceration of ever larger numbers of people
right.
and and racism. And as a matter
Mhm.
of fact, I think he instinctively grasped that the prison system was perhaps the most dramatic expression of structural racism.
Okay,
Uh, and and let me say parenthetically that what frightened the conservatives so much about those demonstrations during the pandemic that we were talking about was
right,
that they revealed the beginning of an understanding of the structural character of racism that's, so many of us have been calling for so many decades. That was
right,
what was so threatening, that it wasn't just about people who disliked Native Americans or Black people or Latinx people. It was about the institutions that constitute the groundwork of this society. That was what was threatening. And so, as I was saying, I think that George kind of instinctively recognized that there was something major about building movements, not just around political prisoners, but around the institution itself and
Right,
relationship to racism. And I think that we have to continue to talk about this. Oftentimes, as I frequently say, you know, those of us who've been out there trying to do this work for a long time, we get tired of listening to ourselves.
right,
Uh, because we've been saying it for so long. But sometimes you just have to keep on saying it and
right,
keep on making the argument, and then at a certain moment it resonates,
right,
and it has the kind of power uh, that reflects the cumulative work of organizers who truly believe that we can create a radical democracy in this country, not a bourgeois democracy, which is
right, right,
what we've been experiencing. And that it has to do with um, abolishing prisons. It has, and let me say that that this was the primary effort of critical resistance to
right,
introduce a way of being critical of the prison system that did not conclude with plans for reforms, that did not conclude with ways to
right,
make the prison system better, but rather with ways to get rid of the prison system. And that really resonating. And I think it has to, you see the impact of that work um, within the prison itself, an enormous numbers of people inside who have contributed, so wonderfully, uh, by writing books and by uh, uh, films and in a sense, sometimes we feel depressed because we think we've been doing this work for so long and we don't see the
right,
results because we want something radically different. We want to get rid of all prisons. But then
right,
I think that sometimes we have to recognize that that work has had a profound impact on large numbers of people, and especially sisters and brothers and our siblings who are inside, who
right,
who recognize that they can play a central role in this process, rather than being marginalized in the way that they've always been. And I'm so thankful for that. It's not the victory that we wanted,
right,
because they are still incarcerated, but it does indicate that we have the power to bring about change. And
right,
certainly, if you look at the attitudes of even ordinary people in this country now toward the prison system, they've changed. I can remember when people were afraid to associate themselves with anything that had to do with someone who was incarcerated.
right,
And children were afraid to um, explain that their parents were incarcerated. And so it makes me feel really good to know that at least we've kind of, lifted that burden, that we can talk about incarceration without expecting the kind of shame that was always associated with it before.
sure. Yeah, it was much, much worse in years past. And I mean, there's still a lot of work ahead of us. how do you, like, when we talk about um, just getting rid of prisons, which I'm happy that, yes, we absolutely need to do that. How do you look at what we need to do, outside to ensure that we have a more restorative or reparative, um, concept of people who, you know, commit a crime, for lack of an even better word, because I'm not even sure if it's, sometimes it's clearly a crime, sometimes it's, I needed to eat, I needed to whatever. How do we, try to prepare for something like that? Like, what if I could close the jail downtown in Riverside down? What would it look like? What should we do? You have, I mean, and you've got a worldview, right? Of what people are doing. What kinds of things could we do in preparation for that?
Well, I think it's important, first of all, to recognize that it's not so simple.
Right, of course, absolutely.
And we're urged not to think in complex terms. We're urged to think as simply as possible. And so when we talk about abolishing jails and prisons and detention facilities and child
Mhm.
welfare, all of that,
Right,
oftentimes people will only think about that process of dismantling. Excuse me.
mm,
But the work that has been done by many abolitionist organizations, Critical Resistance, and many others, and all of the various organizers and thinkers who
mm,
helped us to um, recognize the nature of a possible abolitionist process,
right,
pointed out that we can't look myopically at what it is we want to get rid of. We can't get
right,
rid of the uh, prison system and leave everything else that's responsible for the building of an institution that is so violent and repressive intact.
right,
And that is the lesson that we learned from the failure to truly get rid of slavery. Uh, uh,
right,
because it was not only about getting rid of the discrete institution or the institution as a discrete element of society, but it was
right,
about getting rid of all of the ways in which slavery had insinuated itself, the
right,
institutions into people's thinking, into educational system, etc. And
right,
so what we learn from that is that the very process of abolition is about imagining a different world, a different society.
right,
You know, we need a society that is not based in repression, one that doesn't require these institutions. Uh, and so that means that we have to think, of course, we have to think about the police. Uh, and that's very very central, that connection between those institutions. But we also have to think about education and
right,
those institutions as well. So for me, as someone who has for the vast majority of my life considered myself a revolutionary, communist
right,
revolutionary, let me
right.
say
Yeah,
that.
yeah, right, right,
It, it's also about uh, dismantling capitalism, and it's about a very different kind of society that does not allow the wealthiest capitalists to exert authoritarian control over
right,
the way the society functions. And we're seeing this, very clearly right now.
right, right. Yeah.
So, sometimes we want to be told what to do, and we want to have something very specific to focus on.
Right, right.
And that's important sometimes.
Hmm.
But then we have to develop the capacity to recognize that this is a, very uh, complex set of problems that have to be thought together and have
Right,
to be addressed together. That's the contribution of anti-racist, anti-capitalist feminism. Uh,
okay,
we can't just talk about women, right? Uh,
hmm,
without addressing a whole range of other issues, not just gender. And of course, gender is much broader than the binary structure of gender as we know now.
right,
And the attack on the trans community emanating from the government is indicative of the effort to prevent us from thinking in radical
right,
and progressive terms and challenging what appears to be normal. Uh, uh, yeah, it's a complicated process, and we can't shy away from that
right,
complexity. Uh, so yeah, it's not. I don't want to get rid of this jail in Riverside and then leave everything else the way it was before,
exactly, right,
because the jail will come back or something. Even if the jail is gone, something just as bad as the jail will appear.
right, right, right. Yeah, no, I definitely, these are called wicked problems, right? Um, and I do think that, um, yeah, 2020 helped people no longer question systemic racism. And I don't want to say no longer in everyone, but many people started to begin to understand what systemic racism was, or at least had a kind of concept of it that they did not have before. And these structures, I get are designed in this way to keep us enslaved somehow, regardless of which one it is. But and the carceral one is literal, box and bars and heart-wrenching to see that. What are some bright spots around the world or any, in places in the country that you've seen where, I've watched, I think, Where to Invade Next with Michael Moore and seen a couple of things in a couple of countries, where, incarcerated vote. Candidates have to actually go in and campaign and talk to them and answer questions because they are a voting bloc. And other places where it's not, oh man, these are just plantations in a different way, right? But there are places where it's not like that, where you go in your room, you lock your door, and you have the key. It's not someone locking you in. Um, have you seen bright spots? And what do they look like?
Well, yeah, I have,
Mhm.
and I want to say that I have to constantly remind myself, but this is still a prison.
Yes,
You know,
correct.
and that while strategically it might be important to support uh, uh, the lessening of repression for the sake of those who are inside, we
Mhm.
always have to remember that this is not the change that is going to help bring about a new
Right,
world.
right,
And so, I'm always, happy to see better situations, but at
right.
this time, I have to say, but this is we will never be satisfied with having better jails. And
Okay,
I've been to,
right,
I've been to prisons in the Netherlands and in
right.
Scandinavia uh, yeah, where people, largely women's prisons, where women have their rooms, and like you say, a key to their rooms, and uh, even in Scandinavia, where uh, they were able to watch porn if they wanted to. Uh,
Okay.
but uh,
Yeah.
but there's a system that I saw in the Netherlands, which I was impressed by, uh,
Hmm.
and but I don't think that the U.S. would be prepared to adopt this. I mean, it still involved people being imprisoned, but
Right.
after serving a certain number of years, by the way, nobody has longer terms of
Then we do.
imprisonment than in the US. In most countries, 10 years is considered a long time. 15 years, a very long time. And
Right. Right.
and most countries don't incarcerate people more than 20 years because that's considered a lifetime.
Right.
But at the time I did research, and I wrote about this in a series of articles that I co-authored with a sociologist by the name of Kumkum Bhavnani. Um, they, we visited prisons in the Netherlands where people were able to, uh, after a certain period of time, spend time on the outside. They were able to get jobs, and they were
Okay.
able to come back to the jail. They would go to the job during the day. And then there was a final setup, the latter part of their sentence, where
Hmm.
they would sleep at home during the week, and they
Okay.
would come back to the prison on the weekend.
Okay. Okay.
And and you know, they never had any problems. They rarely
Right.
had any problems. And that something like that could be easily instituted. I'm not saying that I would argue that this is absolutely what we have to do, particularly when we're talking about abolishing incarceration
Right.
entirely. But you see, all kinds of interesting um, efforts to lessen the repression.
Right.
However, I've not seen anyone lessen the racism.
Ah.
It's interesting because in all the prisons I've visited all over the world, uh, you always see a disproportionate number of Black people or people of color. And in Australia, it's of course it's Aboriginal people in
Aboriginal.
Australia. But in
Right.
Europe, it's Black people. It's people of African descent who are in prison in the Scandinavian countries, for example.
Wow.
So this connection between the racism and state repression exists literally all over the world. And one of the problems with efforts to reform their practices is that generally people who are immigrants don't have the capacity to have a home where they can,
Right. Right.
live
Right.
on the
Right.
outside. Uh, and so you can't participate in those programs if you don't have an address. And so that rules out immigrants, right?
Right. Um, I have a question. It's a little aside from this, but it definitely had some of this, at least when as you talk about immigrants, because that's one of our bigger issues too. And I've met a young man who is um, a DACA, but brilliant, and went to University of Chicago and is doing this kind of on the ground work And his question was, that South and Appalachia have always been areas of people resistance, even amidst stereotypes. And he wanted me to ask you, so I am, how do we help people pay attention to what's going on in the South and across the country, particularly in ways the police are becoming ICE agents and crimi how do you put it? Crimigration is
Immigration.
rising. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean
How do,
that's a really important question, and I think that those of us who are used to challenging the system of incarceration because of the anti-Black racism that is inherent in it.
right, right,
Uh, we have to recognize the ways in which other communities suffer the violence of that institution. And, certainly with the crisis of immigration that has been brought about by the government and
hmm
by building walls, the wall in Mexico, which reminds me of, the wall in Israel that completely mars the landscape and is the cause of so much violence. Uh,
right,
yeah, I think I'm from the South,
right,
and
hmm
and I've been to Appalachia, and I've noticed that you know there've been massive changes. When I was growing up in the South, you rarely saw anybody who was not Black or white.
right,
Uh,
right,
and But now, of course, with uh, changes in the economy, the whole construction industry, it depends on immigrants.
right,
Uh, you know, in large part, Black people have lost that art of constructing and
right,
building houses and so the very people who are assisting in doing this work are criminalized because they might not have papers, and they are the targets of the immigration police, ICE,
right,
and let's also think about the ways in which ICE has insinuated itself into campus politics. Uh, and the ways in which participants and leaders of movements are threatened and are deported. The case of
right,
the young man at Columbia who was an important figure in the challenge. I mean, I'm sorry. I have a hard time believing that this is happening on our campuses. This kind of um, bowing to fascism and I
right.
realize now that Colombia is now changing so many of its processes in order to comply with the demands that have been made by Trump and the federal government around these issues.
Yeah, in fact, Dylan, in a conversation this week, was just incensed about how the UC system had pretty much kowtowed and said, DEI goes and everything else goes, and we're going to toe the party line for the federal government. And it just is going to get worse. So we really have to rally and um, attack every point that's where we're being attacked. Really, we have to fight back, just like you said. We can't just let things happen. But the question, even on the table, is, how do we, how do we strategically fight out these next few years, and how do we prevent a dictator from becoming set in place? And, those are some pretty large questions.
Well, we have to protest. I know that people are often afraid of the consequences uh, for their lives, for their um, ability to continue the work that they're doing, whether they're students or professors. But I think this is such a critical period that we can't think about ourselves as individuals in
Right,
that way,
right,
uh, because that's the surest way to guarantee that we will all be isolated and all be sacrificed at that altar of fascism.
right,
So I've been talking for, I sound like a broken record to myself. And of course, many other people have been talking about the pitfalls of individualism and how we need to imagine ourselves as a collective force uh, and how we can do the work even though we
mhm,
are afraid. And if we come together, we are a much more powerful force than those who are arrayed against us. I think we have to continue to work on that and continue
mhm.
to generate support so that it's not possible for uh, ICE to pick off, one student at a time and, send
Right,
them
right,
to Texas or to Guantanamo or wherever, because
right,
that's exactly what they're attempting to do. And then utilizing the argument that they are responsible for the spread of anti-Semitism. Uh, you know,
right, right.
we have to make it very clear that the struggle against anti-Semitism is very much a part of the struggle against racism. And anyone who is anti-racist also has to challenge anti-Semitism.
Right,
But what we're witnessing now is the use of this putative anti-Semitism to justify uh, repression and to justify the destruction of movements,
right.
and we can't allow that to happen.
Yeah, we have to do what you're saying is we have to get out there and speak on it in every possible way we can. But certainly if we can get large groups of people and crowds together to do that, and then get them to do the same thing, we it's required. It's not even a nice to have. It is required. We have to be talking about these things so that people get greater and greater understanding and hopefully get mad,
Exactly.
and want to do something.
Yeah.
So we have come to the audience Q&A time, and I
Okay.
would like to tell anyone watching, if you have questions, please drop them in the Q&A, which you will see at the bottom of your screen. And at this time, I would like to bring on Yvette Dubell, who's going to moderate our Q&A portion for Dr. Davis. So Tech, if we could bring Yvette into the room.
Hi, Janice. Hello, Dr. Davis. Well, one person, I think this is Mary Valdemar, wanted me to wish, she expressed that she wished we had emojis activated so that you could see tons of hearts and fist up on your comments about abolition and radical organizing. So I just thought we would want to know that. Well, one
Uh-uh.
Oops, I'm sorry, I turned my camera off.
Oh, okay.
Okay, sorry.
There you are.
How do you take care of you all doing this necessary work? And because you've been doing it for so long, could you share some of the things you've learned?
Well, of course, we have to take care of ourselves. And, you know, um, self-care has become, such I mean, it's become a marketing term now. So I think we have to recognize that also whatever we try to do is going to be taken up by the capitalists and turned into something other than what we want and need. But I think especially thanks to uh, Black feminist movements and feminist movements, more broadly, uh, we understand the connection between the individual and the movement in ways that we did not in the past. Uh, so yes, we all have to take care of ourselves. If we don't take care of ourselves, then there's no possibility of winning any victories. That's a sine qua non. Uh, uh, but I think that we, also have to recognize that doing this work is about creating a different life, creating, and in a sense, foreshadowing the lives that we want people to be able to lead in a society in which racism will have been minimized, in which repression is not at the forefront of addressing questions of harm, restorative justice, transformative justice. And if we really believe that that's a possibility, we have to start modeling it now. Uh, and so, yeah, I'm very fortunate that I recently turned 81, and I'm still able to get out there. I think I am. I can still try to get out there and do the work. Um, I'm on the East Coast right now, as I was explaining before the webinar actually formally started, that I'm um, attending the birthday of the woman who persuaded my mother to become an activist before I was born, and it's her 110th birthday tomorrow. So she'll be a super centenarian. And I look at her, I've known her all my life. I look at her and she's always been a staunch communist activist. Uh, but she's always loved art. She's, loved music. And she lives a life that is, very rich and very full in the process of doing the work. And I think that, sometimes we assume that if you are an activist, like that's the only thing that you could do, not realizing that there are musicians who are changing people's minds, who are reaching out to people and changing their hearts, and they're activists, so that we can do the work without destroying ourselves. As a matter of fact, we could do the work and while making ourselves feel better and richer uh, and I always point out that we have the evidence of Black music, which is now all over the planet, and that is the music that was produced by people who were intensely involved in the struggle to end slavery and to end racism. And and so, the beauty can emerge from struggle. And let's always remember that that being an activist is not about sacrificing oneself, sacrificing, all of the other aspects that one might cultivate in one's life. But it's about, learning how to appreciate beauty and happiness and all of those human things as well.
Thank you for that. Let's see. Sabella wants to know what demand should we make of our elected officials to strategically fight back against these attacks against our democracy? It appears that they're not doing anything to resist.
Yeah, well, it depends on where you are and how you're going to make those demands, but there definitely should be pressure exerted on those who purport to represent us. Uh, but let's also remember that we don't always have to uh, formulate our demands in a way that has a directionality that moves towards elected officials. I think electoral politics is very important, but no politician has ever really changed the world. No president has ever really been responsible for the changes that we've experienced in this country. It's mass movements. It's organizations that have cropped up as a consequence of people's collective desires and desires for and imaginations of a different world. And so I think we have to remember that while doing electoral work is important and being in connection with those whom we supposedly elected, but at the same time, we have to remember that that's not going to change the world by itself. More people did not vote for either of the presidential candidates than voted. Let me say, more people voted for no one than voted for either of the presidential candidates. But let me say that I think that's sad uh, because it means we don't understand how important it is to choose whom we fight with. It's not about the person who's going to represent us and do, what we think is necessary. If we had been able to choose someone else to engage in battle, we would be a lot better off than we are right now, because we're having to defend victories that were won decades and decades ago, civil rights victories. But anyway, don't let me get started on that because we'll take up the rest of the time.
Okay, I'm going to try and combine a few questions because I only have a few more minutes here. So, can you speak to creating alternatives to top-down models of thinking for people who are still working with community-based organizations? And then, in that same vein, what do you see that gives you hope in terms of organizing?
Well, yeah, I think that if we look at the examples, some of the examples that came out of the civil rights movement, Ella Baker, who was an amazing leader, but at the same time, she argued that we don't have to fixate on leadership in the way that we do. We don't have to assume that we can't do anything unless we find the charismatic leader. And in the Black movement, it was the charismatic, masculinist minister leader. Uh, she talked about the possibility of collective leadership. And I think with Black Lives Matter, uh, the influence that formation had, around the time of Ferguson and during that period, it was important to be given the opportunity to think about new paradigms of leadership, and we see now, more women in leadership, more Black women, more queer women in leadership than we've ever seen in the history of this country. And we also see a kind of leadership that is very different from what we were historically accustomed to. And then you said you told me to say something about hope.
What do you see that's hopeful, that gives you hope, that inspires you now? And if you weave into that answer some encouragement for, we have a lot of college students who are wanting some sort of advice about how they use their position, their platform, how to make use of social media to organize. So if you can weave that, where you're finding hope with encouraging college students and young people. Okay, thank you.
Well, I'm not really the person to talk about using social media because that's like about two generations. We had to learn how to use long distance phone calls to do organizing. But I've learned a lot about, I think, the impact of social media, and I would just say something very simple, which is my usual response, is that this is a new technology of communication. And we have to learn how to utilize it effectively and not allow the technology to use us. And I think uh, uh, we know that capitalism is going to, try to utilize the new technology to guarantee the generation of more and more profits. Uh, and And that's what's happening right now. Uh, so I think we have to think, very deeply about how to make effective use of the existing technologies of communication rather than simply assume that they will be, there for whoever wants to use them, because they will not be. They will do the work. You will use the technologies, and you will recognize that they're doing, the work of the masters. Our Lord said, "The master's tools will not dismantle the master's house." Uh, and on this question of hope, which was what you raised at first, it's hope is so central to our capacity to engage in long-term struggles. And I think it's essential that we not imagine ourselves as being involved in a struggle of the moment. But this is a movement, a set of campaigns, a struggle that has a very long history. We only constitute the most recent instantiations of that effort to rid our country and our world of racism and colonialism and heteropatriarchy. And it's our responsibility as people who are just going to be on this earth for a little while, to leave a mark, to make a contribution. As we all are gathered here this evening, we can reflect on why it is we're here, what made this possible, who did the work that allowed us to develop the capacity to talk about racism and heteropatriarchy and transphobia and colonialism, and so who did the work, who made it possible for us to come this far, and as we think about that, we should also ask ourselves how we are going to contribute to that continuum. How 50 years from now, there may be people who look back at our era. And, as we look back to our enslaved ancestors with a great deal of gratitude for the fact that they refused to accept their plight. And that made it possible for us to do the work today. So I guess I'm saying hope is not an optional uh, uh, phenomenon here. It's not something that we can do without. Hope is actually central, it's essential. And hope is always generated. And again, I call on my sister Mariam Kaba, who argues that hope is a discipline. Hope has to be created. It's not just something that we feel or don't feel. It's something that we have to produce. And that is our role to generate hope for ourselves and for generations to come.
Um, thank you, thank you so, so very much. Thank you, Yvette, for your moderation here. But Dr. Angela Davis, you bring us hope. You give us hope. We have, many of us have, seen or read or heard about your struggle in the struggle. And so it actually keeps me hopeful, to be able to get up every day and say, okay, let's do this some more, right? How do we attack this? And the one person who's experiencing, racism or terrorism, um, is just as worth the effort as us trying to do it for the many. And so I really want to applaud you and thank you. I also want to give you an opportunity for any closing remarks, if you would like, before we go into our panel discussion.
Oh, I don't know. I think I just made my closing remarks
Okay.
because it really is about encouraging everyone to become a part of this effort to uh, create a path toward a new world. And
Right,
I guess in closing, what I would say is that we have to remember that we are powerful. We are potentially very powerful. And
yes,
that is precisely the reason why we see the billionaires and the ultra conservatives arrayed against us because they fear our power, and they are trying to return us to a previous era. We represent the future and
right,
they represent the past. And all of the efforts, including the kind of McCarthyist efforts to get rid of class, get rid of curricula that involve Black
right,
studies, critical race theory, and
right.
the DEI. I mean, there were many of us who were critical of the framework of DEI because justice is not even included there.
Right, right,
But we have to support that now and recognize that we can win. We don't have to capitulate. That is the worst thing that
right,
we would do, to join those like Columbia people and UC California people who are capitulating to the
right.
fascist Washington.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. Thank you so much. Selena, can we give uh Dr. Davis just a little gift of music as we transition into our panel discussion? And we want to all thank you so much. I am sure all of us are doing this exact same thing. Um, and I found this on a list of music that you had put together for discussion.
black bodies swinging in the southern breeze.
And this is Billie Holiday singing Strange Fruit.
From the poplar trees.
So thank you very much. We're going to transition to our panel now. And if you stay on, I appreciate it. And when you're ready to go, I understand that too. So thank you very, very much. Yvette, thank you so much. That went wonderfully well. And hopefully you felt like I did about it, that this is just, you know, a precious moment in time that we get to be with, you know, one of the great social justice warriors in the world and clearly in our world. So I'm so very, very happy that I could have been in the room with her and the rest of you as well. Um, as we transition, I want to thank again Inland Empire Community Foundation for its support of this programming, as well as all of our community partners that are here over on, I guess, your right. And I am going to now hand it over to Yvette Dubell to begin the panel discussion.
Okay, thank you, Janice. So I'd like to welcome our panelists. We're going to begin with, let's see, Vanya Quarles, Esquire.
We're
You
gonna
muted,
ask you
Yvette, you
to
muted.
unmute.
You muted.
I'm so sorry. Y'all missed all of that introduction I did. I'll start over again. Thank you, Janice. So we're going to start with Vanya. Vanya Quarles Esquire is a mother, grandmother, and partner who is also Starting Over Incorporated co-founder and director. California Black Power Network, and FICPFM board member, member of the National Council of Criminal Justice, and practicing attorney. She works in Riverside and lives in Moreno Valley's beautiful and diverse city. Vanya holds visions of a statewide community land trust for our people and has co-created the Rutschel Sink McGee Community Land Trust. Dylan Rodriguez, PhD, is a distinguished professor at UC Riverside, where he's been employed since 2001. He is a faculty member in the Department of Black Study and the Department of Media and Cultural Studies. His most recent book, White Reconstruction, Domestic Warfare, and the Logistics of Genocide, received the 2022 Franz Fanton Book Prize. Marilyn Grell Brisk, PhD, is a visiting assistant professor at Pitzer College and a Black Studies scholar, particularly interested in global, local social movements that affirm Blackness and Black futurity. She specializes in the connections between exploitive economic systems, power, hierarchy, and anti-Blackness and othering. Before we get into the questions, well, I guess we're going to do the questions first, and then Janice is going to monitor the questions for us at the end, okay? And whoever wants to start can just like raise your hand and we'll start, or just speak out, or we'll start that way. What are your reflections on the interview with Dr. Angela Davis? So let's start there. Who wants to begin? Let's start with you, Dylan, since you had a long, sort of relationship with Dr. Davis.
So yeah, Professor Angela Davis, I call her Angela. She's been my teacher, my friend, my comrade, my collaborator and co-conspirator for a long time. She brought me into the abolitionist movement. First it was an anti-prison movement. So like, let me actually say that. We talk about abolition as if it's been around, meaning the contemporary version of abolition, anti-prison abolition. We talk about it in a way that I think doesn't fully appreciate how a lot of the political and organizing work and thought work that we were collectively building in the late 90s into the first few years of the 2000s were trying to move and push number one, against prison reform and criminal justice reform, because across the spectrum, from revolutionary political prisoners to criminal defense attorneys, to liberal academics, there was a generalized consensus that pushing for criminal justice and prison reform was not only failing to solve the problem of massive anti-Black repression and domestic warfare, it was actually part of it. Not only was it part of it, it was central to it, meaning reform, prison criminal justice reform, are actually central to how the state wages war against all these targeted populations. So we had to push from an analysis, we had to push through an analysis that understood the limits of prison and criminal justice reform toward an anti-prison analysis, right? So that's where we started, was an anti-prison analysis, right? How do we attack prisons? And at that point, we were beginning to really circulate the phrase the concept, prison industrial complex, which interestingly enough, in the last 15 years has been replaced by this other generic phrase, mass incarceration, which doesn't mean anything. The phrase mass incarceration doesn't mean anything. If there's one takeaway point I want to offer to the 146 people who are here, we got to stop using that phrase. It's a useless phrase. The phrase prison industrial complex is far more meaningful because what it links are all of the institutions, including non-state institutions, that are directly involved in carceral and policing domestic war, right? It's not mass incarceration. It is targeted, uneven domestic warfare. So we had to push from prison industrial complex analysis to anti-prison analysis toward an abolition analysis. And that took time. I could talk for days about that, but I just wanted to add that to the way in which Angela, I think, thoughtfully reflected on the moment and just appreciate that.
Thank you, Dylan. I appreciate that. Vanya, do you want to speak on that next?
I think for me, what came up was the fact of all the people whose shoulders that folks who are engaged in this work stand on. So, being part of a panel to follow Dr. Angela Davis, and then she gave recognition and notice to Ella Baker and others that have come before and contributed to the work that we do now. And I used to think that this work should or would end if we got it right at some point. And I think now I'm coming to accept that what some people have said before is that if we want to be free and if we want liberty and if we want liberation, then it's not something that you can obtain at once and then it be done forever. It's something that we have to be vigilant enough about to maintain, to enjoy, and to pass on to our children and our children's children. So it just humbles me to be here in this space right now with so much opportunity. I just missed the civil rights movement and era. And I fantasized about it, romanticized that period, and wanted to be there. And I'm not sure that this is what I thought it would be, because I see the tragedy. I see the millions of people that have been impacted by a criminal justice system that has an insatiable appetite for Black and brown bodies. And that, yeah, some of the stigma has changed and it's much better than it was. But we have a man in the White House who is being targeted because of his status as being a convicted felony, as opposed to his status of being just a horrible person. And so it sets the narrative back a decade or more. It sets the humanity of system impacted people back by decades. And so the privilege that surrounds and shrouds a person in the White House who can be convicted of a felony and be elected to presidency doesn't come with us. We don't bring that. I'm a third generation convicted felon. And, there are privileges that I don't have, that my children wouldn't have if they were convicted. And it's like, this is an opportunity to wrestle with that in a way that centers the humanity and the contributions of system impacted people beyond the presidency. So I was just having all these thoughts. There was a person named Ruchell Sinque McGee who was released from California prison after about 60 plus years of being incarcerated. And he came home and he had worked his life away in prison as a jailhouse attorney, as a organizer, as an activist from behind the walls, and he came home with nothing. They spit him out to die. He survived 3 months out here. And I thought about how many people this happens to. And that's where this Rochelle Cinque McGee Community Land Trust idea came from, is that we have to care for ourselves. And to Dr. Davis's point, an elected representative is not coming to save us. So what are we going to do? I guess it's a question I have to ask myself.
Okay, Marilyn, do you have some comments on Dr. Davis's
Well,
interview?
sure. I mean, Dylan and Vanya raised some good points about, what Dr. Davis talked about. But for me, I think one of the things that like really uh, stood out for me was the idea that the struggle for liberation is a long process. And I was thinking about, as Dr. Davis was talking about this, was thinking about a reading circle that I run at Lopez Urban Farm, and we've been reading Amilcar Cabral's Return to the Source. And one of the things that we talked about 2 weeks ago was the fact that even in 72, Cabral says that 10 years is a long and even period in the life of a human being, but a short interval in the history of a people. And so understanding that our struggle, what we're going through right now, even as it feels very overwhelming, that it is, in the grand scheme of things, a long struggle that we engage in. But also, thinking about some of the things that Dr. Davis talked about too, is like the pervasiveness of anti-Blackness that we see, right? That underlies even the fascism that we see right now in the United States. A lot of it is about this idea of anti-Blackness and how it's structured in the way that we think, in the way that our institutions operate. And so for me, those things were very, very salient.
Okay, so listening to each of your comments has made me think about the way that we think about innovation, right? It's not a moment, it's not a thing. You create a context, you create an ecosystem that makes innovation more likely. It seems that each of you is really talking about creating that same sort of ecosystem for liberation to thrive. Would you agree to that? And could each of you kind of speak to what, in your expertise, do you think? What do we need to create that ecosystem for liberation to thrive? What's required for, it's almost like, is there a liberation continuum, I'm wondering, that you can kind of help illustrate? Anybody want to take that one on?
I mean, I can offer some, oh, go ahead, Vonya, you go.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to fill the gap. Go ahead. I'll go after you.
I'll be quick. I'll consider me a prompt for Vonya. Okay. I think the most direct and consistent answer to that question is that effective liberation movements that have traction for any period of time and that can accelerate actual collective advancement towards some version of radical self-determination, autonomy, freedom, security, beautiful shit. You know what I mean? Like the things that people need and want against oppressive colonial chattel captive systems, right? You have to pose a credible threat to a substantial disruption of business as usual, right? So like take that and interpret it in whatever way you like. Think about it at whatever scale you like. It could be at the scale of a town. It can be at the scale of a region, right? It can be a scale bigger than that. But without a credible threat of actual substantial disruption of business as usual, whether it's the state, whether it's what we call racial capitalism, whether it's city government, whether it's the university, advancement toward liberation is very difficult. Right? So credible threats to disrupt, and then of course we've been in moments where there are actual disruptions, right? The problem is that there's no guarantee that the disruption is going to produce something which is liberatory. Sometimes the disruption, depending on who is instigating it, can actually instigate progress toward what we are currently experiencing, which is kind of classical fascism. Right. So I'm not saying this as a kind of overarching generalizing statement about disruption. I'm saying it has to be principled, it has to be guided through collective desires for actual liberation. And the disruption itself has to be thoughtful and tactical, and then collectively theorized as a strategic intervention to just stop these systems from continuing to amass casualties. So, but I think if we look at the historical record at liberation movements, they've only ever had traction when there is an element within the broader movement, or even outside the movement, that is actually, posing a threat to destroy the system in part or in whole, whatever the system is.
Thank you. And I would say because I appreciate that. And someone shared with me that chaos is not the absence of order, it is the presence of multiple orders. And so in order to disrupt, I think for me, I don't have to go and create something. I just need to become part of an ecosystem that allows other members of that ecosystem to thrive and be their authentic selves. And so if their disruption doesn't mix with my idea of what disruption is, doesn't mean I negate that effort. That's part of the movement, and that's part of the beauty of people in movement together. So I don't know that we have to create it. We have to become at one with it and accept it. That I have to accept I cannot control a movement. I cannot control how other people show up to disrupt and create the world they want to see. And I think that's a lot different than the respectability politics that many of us in my era grew up with. There were just certain ways to show up, and that's not what movement is. When we look at the successful movements in this modern period that we're in, it was everybody coming, everybody being and doing. And that's how we get movement. And so I think we're getting there. I think that this time that we're in now is forcing us to be accepting of each other. We talk about belonging, but movement is a place of belonging. And if I get hung up on whether you identify as a reformist or abolitionist or a feminist, then I'm doing too much and I need to just go sit down and watch.
So, when Dylan mentioned like this idea of disruption, I actually processed it initially as that there was a credible threat to people, like the citizens, right? So I was thinking in terms of, very apathetic, like middle class bourgeois ideas, right? And people who sort of just live their lives as if none of this is going to affect them. And then something happens. So what we're seeing, like with the current administration, that the everyday person, American, is being affected. And so then they are motivated to then do town halls, right, and confront their elected officials. But then as Bonnie was talking, I started thinking that it isn't just like this, an external disruption, right? But it's also what we are doing, as people looking to create the world that we want, right, that we're imagining, that we are disrupting business as usual. So then now we're thinking more along the lines of what happened in 2020, when you did have mass disruption across the country. I guess the thing that does come up for me is more of like, how do we then respond to, right, the state apparatus, right, when it comes into play, right? So the state becomes what leverages like violence against us, and then it's sort of like, what do you do then, right? Of course, it's organized, but those were the thoughts that kind of came to me as Dylan started talking about this idea of disruption, because I do think that it is potentially, you get the most creative way of thinking about social movements, thinking about organizing, when you have both of those things happening at the same time, where you have people willing to disrupt, right? And engage in disruptive politics and disruptive behavior. And you also have that sort of external, right, disruption that's happening, that's forcing you to actually come to terms with what is actually happening.
Thank
Can I
you,
give you an
Marilyn.
example? Can I give you an
Yes,
example of
yes,
what I think?
absolutely, Dylan.
Because
Go ahead.
I'm on board. I'm on board with everything that my comrades here are talking about. And like I think about, it's a small example, it's a humble example, but it's a meaningful one to me, which was the November, December, I think it might have spilled into January, the UC strike, right? A couple years ago. Big UC strike, biggest, university-based strike, I believe, in the history of the United States. And within the larger body of the strike, which was a picket line every single day, and I was there every day, right? Like I thank the strikers, right? I'm not unionized, unfortunately, but I thank the strikers. I mean, y'all gave me a day off because I don't cross picket lines, right? And then you gave me another 100 days off, so thank you. But so I was there, so I was a close observer to what I'm talking about here. But you had the formal strike that was like the union sanctioned version of the strike, right? And there's always tensions within the union between the rank and file and the leadership, especially in the United States, because the leadership is down with that respect, a version of that weird respectability politics that Vonya's talking about, right? Like, so they want to be on some kind of good dialogue terms with corporate, managers and whatnot. But then you also had an autonomous group of people who are also anonymous. So they're autonomous and anonymous, who engaged in non-union sanctioned extra legal activities outside the formal sanction of the actual strike, but which were operating to advance the principles of the strike. So advancing the principles of forcing the institution to stop business as usual until it would recognize the fact that workers at the university are constantly suffering from housing displacement, food insecurity, and all the rest of this, right? And so they engaged in extra legal measures, non-union sanctioned measures, including small, humble things, but which meaningful things like dining hall takeovers, right? Like there was a coordinated system-wide takeover of dining halls in which the purpose was to give the food away to hungry people, including students and including workers, right? And including community members that were not employed by or attending the university. This happened across the UC system as a gesture to like demonstrate, here's what we intend to do, right? Not only are we protesting the fact that we are suffering food insecurity, here's what we intend to do, because we're at a wretched, disgusting, decadent institution that accumulates all this food, trashes it, and then wants to police people from actually getting access to it. We're going to disrupt that. I learned a lot from being around and near that kind of situation in terms of appreciating what Vonya and Marilyn are talking about, that there has to be a kind of chaotic totality of activity that poses multiple kinds of respectable threats and credible disruptive, non-respectable threats to these institutions and systems. So I just want to like echo what my friends here are saying. Absolutely, 10 times.
Okay, so since everybody's on the same page with that, I just want to do, I'm going to go back to a question that came up that I didn't get to for Dr. Davis, and I want y'all to respond to it because I think it leads into exactly what I feel like everybody's sort of saying. But one of the questions that was asked more than a couple of times was, do we have to dismantle the existing system in order to create this better alternative that you all are talking about? So can each of you speak to the dismantling of the current system, what you think that looks like? Can you each speak to that? And whether or not you actually are saying that that is what's required.
But can we get clarity on what you mean by the system?
Well, this is what they were saying. I think
Oh,
that they were talking about the government. Some people were saying the system, but I think that they're just basically talking about the status quo. Can we replace the status quo without dismantling it?
Okay.
Hold on,
All right.
everybody's
Oh
muted,
my.
but I think I saw everybody shake their heads, but everybody was muted. So can everybody just do like a quick round on that and respond to that?
Yeah. You guys want me to go? Anybody have a burning desire to go first? Okay. So I think that it sounds radical to some people to hear someone say, burn it down, starve the beast. Yes, it's got to go. But I think that two things can be true. I don't think that it has to be one at a time. So I think we need to dismantle the system while building the beloved communities that we want, so that we're not just saying burn it down. Because I got anarchists in my family, right? And they'd be like, thing down. Well, that has to happen. That's the reality. It has to go. And we have to have something better, because nature abhors a vacuum. So if we're not building as we're abolishing, then we're setting ourselves up for something that could be much worse. And so I think building, some people say lift and climb, but I think, yes, it has to go. And I think the history of this country, its origin story, has hurt people for a long time. The need or desire to cover that up and run from it. There's never been a reconciliation, either to the indigenous folks, to Black folks, and all the other folks that have been harmed by this protection of a hierarchy that only exists here for the furtherance of capitalism. So how can we protect a system like that? So it has to go, and we have to have something better in its place. That's my 2 cents.
So I'll go if it's okay with Dylan. I was I was thinking a little bit about like this little group that I have where we're kind of struggling talking about these questions. And one of the sort of takeaways from this speech that Cabral gave in 1972 to the United Nations was, one of the things he did was try to reframe questions, right? So it wasn't whether or not we should fight and blame like the Portuguese for colonialism in Cabo Verde. It was about like asserting our sovereignty, right? So it's a slight shift that happens. It's not focusing on like, the colonialist, right? It's focusing on ourselves, right? And so I got a lot of pushback from students who were like, we should actually confront empire directly, and we should blame them, and we should take them down, and we should do everything that we can. And I get that. And I also think that Ruth Wilson Gilmore talks about, so we talk about abolition, we talk about breaking things down and burning down the system, but she says that abolition is not about, it's about presence, not absence of things. I think that's actually reframing the discussion altogether. So let's not necessarily talk about, let's burn the thing down. It's like, okay, what is it that we want, right? What kind of like life affirming institutions that we want? So picking up on what Vanya was saying, right? Thinking about what it is that we want, right? As we're also working to get rid and dismantle the system of oppression that we see every day. So I lifting up what Vanya said from a slightly different direction.
Dylan, how about you?
Yeah, I'll say a couple things. One is that I'm going to say that I think we need to stay with both both ends of I guess some people think about it as a dialectic, but I think just both ends of what abolition does, mean that it is by its very nature is a creatively destructive practice, right? Like the roots of the Black diasporic tradition of abolition has to do with revolutionary counterwar against the plantation, right? It was about destroying the plantation, not merely destroying the slave owner and the slave class, but destroying the conditions that would allow them to exist. So like there's a creative destructivity in abolition that I don't want us to let go of. I think we let go of it too easily because it's scary. And yes, it's supposed to be scary, right? It's supposed to be scary. Like it's a humbling thing. And I'm not sitting here fetishizing it. I'm saying like it's like in some ways terrifying, but if there's a kind of a creativity to that we need to honor and respect. At the very same time that what we're also talking about, if we're going to be liberatory abolitionists, right? If we're going to be liberatory abolitionists, if we're going to truly be anarchist abolitionists, for example, right? Then we're already thinking about the creativity within that destruction, right? Like as we attack, we're already thinking about like what are the creative forms of togetherness, of power, of community, if we want to use that term, of family, of love, etc., that we enact as we struggle to destroy the violence that is coming at us, right? And like I think we actually do that, right? Like I've been in there with both of you. Like we've been in there. We do that. We actually create all kinds of as you put it, like these ecosystems. But we actually build our own ecosystems. We do it all the time. We don't necessarily recognize it adequately, but I think we actually need to honor what we and the people around us are actually already doing. And so that's part of it. The second part of this too is that I want to challenge the premise of the question, right? Because I don't think it's a question of whether the system needs to be dismantled or destroyed to get at liberation. Because number one, I think we are privileged to be experiencing an accelerating period in the collapse of U.S. empire. Right? I think that's what we are. I think we're already in it. We're also seeing in so many different ways how that collapse is actually being dictated by its own administrators and executive leadership. So I'll use the university as an example, right? What we are currently in is an accelerated period in which the administrative leadership of universities, they are actively demolishing the infrastructures of universities from above. They're destroying it from above. Universities probably will never be the same after this period that we're in, these few months, right? They will probably never be the same. I don't think University of California will ever be the same after this. But the liberal dream of the University of California that serves the public, not that it ever really did, right? But that liberal dream is gone. It's on fire, and we didn't do it. The administration did it, meaning the White House administration and the UC administration. So this demolishing, right, this dismantling, this destruction, it's not even necessarily our folks that are engaged in it. Sometimes it's the planners and administrators of the systems themselves that are actively destroying them from above, right? They have a tendency to do this. Secondly, because of that, especially in California, we're already experiencing a collapse of infrastructure. California is on fire constantly. This state is becoming unlivable in increasingly vast parts of the region. You talk to people in the firefighting community, and they will tell you that whether it's the most recent fire or ones prior to that or the ones forthcoming, they will tell you there's very little to nothing we can do to stop those fires, right? So there's a climate collapse that we are also already in. Right. So like that's not about whether we don't get to choose that. We're already in it. So the question, part of the question here is to like reframe how we understand what we are actually experiencing. We're already experiencing collapse. We're already experiencing demolition that's coming from the people who run these systems. How do we respond to that, right? In ways that don't hold on to some kind of some kind of magical thinking that these systems can somehow be made to work for us or for our people or the people we care about or oppressed people. When they've already been demolished, like those capacities are already being demolished actively all the time. And I think we have answers, by the way. So this is not intended to be like a pessimistic statement. I think we've got the answers. I think we're already doing it. This gathering is part of the answer. This gathering obsoletes the University of California. We don't need the University of California. We got this, and we can proliferate this all day, every day.
Okay, I love this. So related to what you all just said, what can we do to create an environment conducive to the end of prisons and jails? And related to that, I want you to speak to how do we change the punitive mindset that's part of our culture? Because I think that that's a big part of the problem. And can each of you sort of speak to that? Marilyn, do you want to begin?
Sorry, I had
Hold
to
on, you're
unmute
muted.
myself. I had to unmute myself. Sure, I think, I was thinking about some of the questions that were asked earlier, and, the thing is, the punitive system that we live under actually permeates almost all aspects of our lives, right? So it's overwhelming, and so it permeates most of our lives, and also the way that we think. And so for me, and I think a lot of the people that I work with are already thinking about the root of harm, where the root is, right? The conditions that force harm to occur, and are working towards that. And as Dylan was talking about, well, we're already doing the work. I think, Vanya is doing the work, Dylan's doing the work, that you're doing the work. We're all already sort of doing that, but just restating, that we have to think about the world that we want, prefigure it, and actually engage in it. And I think a lot of us do that. A lot of the people in the audience do that. Yeah, let me think a little bit more and add some thoughts after.
Absolutely. Vanya, do you want to
Yeah,
contribute?
I'll try. And I would say, and I think budgets are value statements. And so, we are in the beautiful state of California. In the November election, California decided to send $100+ million a year to the prison system one more time. And it's the same scenario over and over again. It is crime is everywhere. I think everybody probably saw those snatch and grab videos till they were sick of them. You didn't see them anymore after the election, but California voters voted for sending that money to CDCR at a rate of 70%. 70% of California voters said, yes, we want Prop 36. I think they were duped. I think a lot of people didn't understand. They threw in mental health and housing. That was supposed to be part of it. So a lot of people were, enticed to support a proposition that shows one more time that there are always people waiting to lock up bodies. And more often than not, those bodies are Black and brown and poor people that are in there. 40% of them have mental illness, severe mental illness, and another 35% of them have substance use disorders. So that money could have been invested through Prop 47, which is the bill which is a ballot initiative they were trying to overturn, and successfully did so in most parts. But they could have used that money for more mental health services, more housing, more substance use disorder treatment, but we decided that we were going to go back to what we know doesn't work. So now we're in a period of, drug war 2.0. We're going to incarcerate our way into a better system. And so I think that the way we spend money as a state says what we value. And so by voting for something like 36 says that California's in trouble again. The pendulum has swung. The elected folks at the California legislature are feeling a little shaky. And I think it gets to Dylan's point. We spend a long time reforming policies when we should have been eradicating them and doing more work around narratives and putting more money into what we know works. And so I think we have to be mindful when looking at making investments in the same system we know that creates harm. Anytime, this is just for me, anytime I see a bill or a ballot initiative that's going to give money to CDCR, I know that's a big no for me. You can't tell me nothing else. I'm going to follow the dollar. And I think that's critical because we know that it's generational and it's a form of genocide. Most people are locked up during their childbearing years, men and women. And so we're talking about wiping out entire generations of folks or preventing them from even being born because we're relying on a system that was designed to do just what it's doing. And so I think holding folks accountable, taking action, disrupting movement work is what we need right now.
I'll just add to what my friends have said, which is, creating an environment that's conducive to well, I'll just call it abolition, and which also is inherently linked, I think, to changing what you named, Yvette, as a punitive mindset of the existing kind of cultural order. One way, again, this is something people do, but I think we need to do it with intention and we need to do it with acceleration, which is people create their own community-based practices of mutual protection all the time, right? So I think we need to take that up as a collective political practice to insist that it be decentralized and to insist that it not rely on approval or resources from the state or from some nonprofit organization somewhere, right? So I think people call it mutual aid, right? Since pandemic and stuff, like people have started calling it mutual aid. Other people don't want to use that term. They call it something else. They call it solidarity. They call it collective community safety practices, whatever. So I think developing community-based practice of mutual protection, which means a lot of things. It means you look out for each other with housing, look out for each other with food, like you look out for each other for, getting economic resources, whatnot. That tends to decriminalize your network of community, right? It means that, number one, because you have maybe some access to what you need, you might be less likely to spin out and do something that'll put you in the crosshairs of the police or your neighbor who's going to call the police. Again, this is something anybody can do. Like, we can do this right now. And like, you can do this in any kind of neighborhood. You just have to cultivate the mindset. You have to use your term. And that's the answer to that second part of your question. This is the opposite of punishment. It's the opposite of being punitive when you're actually looking out for people. And I'm saying looking out for people you don't necessarily like, which I do all the time, right? There's people I don't like, but I'm still going to look out for them. You know what I mean? Like, I'll still cuss them out, but I'm also going to look out for them, right? So, like, I'm saying that's why. Okay, the second thing I'll say around this is that I got to tell you, I was in a meeting earlier today with this California assembly member, I should call him, named David Alvarez. He's from District 80 in San Diego. He's got the full biography of somebody that you would expect would be, the most progressive, democratic, legislator you'd ever, the son of Mexican immigrants. I think his dad was a farm worker. Went to San Diego State, like has a track record of kind of like voting the right way for certain things. And I got to tell you, he's a complete coward. Like the legislative decisions that he is making currently are a complete accommodation to right-wing fascism. And so a group of us from the ethnic studies community were meeting with him today because he's actually bending to the Zionist anti-Palestinian caucus. They call themselves the Jewish caucus, but that's not really what they are. They're just the anti-Palestine caucus. Who are basically convincing him to put his name on something that they're putting out, right? So we challenged him on that, and it was very obvious that he is not actually guided by principle. He will grift off his own biography to convince us that he represents a certain politics, but he does not. So I think we're also in this period where, like, people who seem to signify that they're progressive Democrats are actually they're deeply cowards, right? Because they're accommodating fascism, and they're very rare, if any, serious exceptions to that rule, right? So I think we need to recognize that as a premise for what we do, and I think that will help us. That will help us to build strategy that doesn't rely on people who are cowards. Like, that's the worst thing you can do. That is self-destructive, to rely on people who are cowards, whether or not they're elected officials, but especially if they are elected officials.
Yeah, just to add to what Dylan was saying, I've been with this idea of like, how do we actually create movement? How do we create those communities that we want? Thinking about my experience at the Highlander Research and Education Center. And, like, I think their model of cultural organizing is so productive and so useful because it is using art and culture to shift the way in which people move. But at the same time, I think I want to acknowledge again, like, the omnipresence of like policing and surveillance, even within our own spaces. And I think that's part of like what people run into, right? Because we do engage in policing of each other, we engage in surveillance of our spaces. And that doesn't foster like healthy like relationships with each other. And to Dylan's point, I think part of what we have to do, right, is to start off by setting principles, right, and saying this is what we actually like are going to engage in and embody, because otherwise you do end up with cowards, right? So, my experience with like the Black Study initiative at UCR was very informative because you really got to see, right, the people who, when there is like room and space for radical change, like they back off, right? And they capitulate to like the administration and to their supervisors, the people that are just above them, and in part for their own self-preservation, right? And for their own self like glorification, if you will. But a large part of this, and the way we counter that is by, when we're in those spaces, to actually talk about and agree upon the principles by which we're going to actually engage in, right? I found that that was probably the most productive thing that we did as a group for BSI is sitting with that and actually doing the work. Again, and to Angela's point earlier, sometimes we think if we just have an idea, we get some people together, we're going to make things happen. And it doesn't always do that. Sometimes that need or that counterinsurgent, to use one of Dylan's term, happens right there in our group. And we have to, organize ourselves in a way to, when that happens, that we can deal with it as we need to. Yeah.
Yvette, can I just circle back on the restorative justice piece just a little bit?
Please do.
Um, so I do criminal defense work, and sometimes there are cases in which there's been some domestic violence. I'm going to use this for an example, and hopefully it's not triggering any of our guests here on the call. But there's a family, there's a family dispute. He gets arrested, and she has 4 children, and he was the one who was working. So now things have kind of changed for her. She's struggling. She doesn't want him to go to prison for what he done. And so he goes to prison. It doesn't help her. It doesn't help her 4 children. So that's an example of how the penal system, or the desire to punish, oftentimes hurts the victim as much as you're punishing the person. So not only is she struggling and doing without, but there's 4 children now. And is he going to be the same person when he comes out? Whereas if we looked at it differently, yes, domestic violence don't work today. It did a generation or 2 ago. I remember that, period. It doesn't work today. But breaking up families is not, what the system, what we would want in a system. It would look more like this. Restorative justice would look like the family member would go and get the services they needed, right? This person could still be able to work, provide his check to his family, and if and when they're able to have a healthy relationship, and he understands he can't put hands on her, or he doesn't feel the desire to put hands on her, that's more restorative. There's a nation in West Africa, and their restorative justice looks like this. If a person does harm in that village, that tribe, that nation, they are put inside of a circle, and the rest of the community surrounds that person. And I was thinking, wow, they're going to throw stones at him or something, because I have this Western idea of what you do to somebody who's messed up. I'm like, punish him. What are you going to do? Throw rocks at him, or what? What? They hurled words at the person in the middle of the circle to remind that person who they are, who they truly are. And so they would tell them the best thing that they've ever done. And they would go around this circle. So at the end of it, this person isn't tore down, this person is built up. Now, we're a long way from there, but we can do much better than what we're doing now when it comes to justice. And you can't have justice without restoring. So that means taking care of the people that have been hurt and harmed, taking care of the person who's called the perpetrator so that they don't do that anymore. That's restorative justice. That's what it looks like. And then the whole community becoming part of that circle so they all heal. And that's really what we need to get to. The penal system is nothing but a carryover from European settlers who had came here and been released from prisons themselves. And so we have to get past that.
Wow, thank you so much, everyone. As we wrap this up, and I'm sorry, Janice, we went over a little bit. I apologize to everybody watching but these were such great answers, I had to let you finish. So as we wrap up, what would you like the community to know about your work and how they can contribute to or help create restorative justice where they are? So Dylan, do you want to start this time?
Yeah, I'm both involved in lots of different collectives and organizations, and some collectives that are not organizations. I've lived in Riverside County for now almost most of my life. Now that I think about it, that's since 2001. So I'll say that rather than laundry list all the stuff I do, I'll just invite people to get in touch with me and like bring me in so I can get in where I fit in and what you're doing. I'd love to be part of it. My cell phone number is 951-756-4713. I'll put my email address in the YouTube comments, I think, because this is on YouTube, right? So I'll go out there and put it up there. I'm not hard to find, y'all. Like you could go to the UC Riverside website if you really want to. Like my emails are on there too, but just bring me in. Like I want to be part of what you're doing. That's what I'll say that.
Thank you, Dylan. Marilyn Vanya, who wants to go next? Marilyn, you need to unmute.
Apologies, I have too many screens open, so my cursor is like a long ways away from where I need it to be. It's kind of like, I mean, I'm involved in a lot of different community organizations through my classes. One of the things I try to do is actually like break down the gap between like the institutions and the community. So you will see me in different organizations, and you're welcome to contact me like Dylan, just like Dylan would. I'm very involved with Lopez Urban Farm right now and part of the Community Partners for Innovation, just thinking about like wellness and what that looks like. So feel free to visit us at Lopez Urban Farm. But I work with Oliver So None, which is part of like Starting Over Inc. That Vanya is the director, or still is, or maybe I don't remember. And Pomona 4As in downtown Pomona, and the Critical Action Social Advocacy Program at Pitzer. So just look me up. I'm at marilyngrell.com.
For me, our website is startingoverinc.org. My email is Vonia. I'm scared to say it in case we got MAGAs watching who want to come and bombard my email, but I'll say it.
They already know you, Vonya. They know who you are.
It's VONYA at startingoverinc.org. And I would love to be a part of any work that you're doing. We recently organized Inland Region Reentry Collaborative. There's about 200 organizations in the Inland Region, San Bernardino and Riverside, who are part of that, and looking at ways that we can, do some stuff. So just really excited about retiring from Starting Over in June of next year, and doing more of the other work, and stepping away from an organization to be a person and just getting more involved. So yeah, hit me up.
So thank you again to all of our fabulous panelists. I really appreciate this time to get to know more about you and your work. And now I'm going to turn it over to Janice so that she can offer up some of the audience questions for you.
Yes, I'm sitting in the background and I'm just, saying all kinds of things to myself related to, destroying the plantations and the conditions that, support them, and, mutual protection, liberatory abolitionist. And, the thing about Howard's is that there's a coach, a coach out there who says one of his mantras is bravery is the cure for regret. And there are studies on, people who are dying and what they either wish they, hadn't done or something like that. They don't think about it. They really regret the things that they didn't do. It might, and so, in this moment, in this place, in this time, we have to put one foot in front of the other every day, just 1 foot, because we can't let up. You know, this isn't a battle that is, okay, it's done, we're good. We have to fight every day. And every time we see something, we have to fight. We have to collaborate to do that. And so I'm really thankful for the three of you and the work you're doing, and Yvette, you as well. So there's a couple of questions from the audience that I think might be important for you to answer. And one is, do you think protesters are more at risk in public protests with the militarization of the police now, because they've become much more militarized? Thoughts on that?
Is the question, are protesters more at risk because it's more militarized? Yes. I mean,
Yes. Yeah, that
in the
was sort
sense
of
of,
the point. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, so yes, and right. So one of
Mhm.
the work of organizers is that we have to train, people that engage in specific types of actions, right? To protect themselves, right? To protect their identities against, doxing, all sorts of things, right? So
Right.
I have to say that in the last year and a half or 2 years, the students that I have seen, like, really actually brave students that have taken on the university administrators, who have put their bodies on the line. I have seen them, like, put together all sorts of toolkits, and work actually to protect themselves too, because that's part of organizing. And the
Right.
second thing is, as you were talking, Janice, I was thinking about Code Pink. And years ago, I am on the committee for activist scholars at the International Studies Association, and we had Medea Benjamin get the award. And as she was talking about the work that Code Pink did, one of the things that really sort of struck me was the fact that Code Pink, in their actions, will also talk about and strategize who is actually putting their bodies on the line, right? And say, right? So I remember being invited to Las Vegas to protest drones, right?
Right.
A base near Las Vegas, and one of the things that they clearly stated was, we want everyone to show up. We're going to show up from from 9 to 12, from 9 to 10. This is where we're at. This is the kind of activities we're engaging in. And from 10 to 12, be prepared to be arrested. And so, like, and they would say, if you are prepared to be arrested, this is what we're doing. And we're organizing for that. And it would be like, okay, we're all getting arrested at this time. And so I think, like,
Okay.
protesters, I think, understand. And as I mentioned, the students understand, like, it is not, it's dangerous, right? And it does require bravery on some level. But, as organizers, we have to protect ourselves. We have to protect the people who we're organizing with. So for me, it's yes, and we're organizing and strategizing against the state. So know what you have to do.
Right. Right. Go ahead.
I'll add to what Marilyn said, which is, um, it's not merely the militarization of the police that we need to be attentive to. It's the militarization and kind of the deputization of administrative bureaucracies, right? So you have like leadership of organizations that has nothing to do with the police. They're not part of the state or the government, and they're doing the work of the police and the criminal justice apparatus. This has been what's happening in the University of California system for a couple of years now, and it's just accelerating, right? But it's happening everywhere. So I think, in terms of understanding that is the conditions of attack against certain forms of protest, the other side of what we're talking about here is, there is a necessity, maybe like a beautiful opportunity, for all of us to rethink how we do protest. Feel me? Like, how we do protest. There's like so many models, so many examples of how to protest oppressive systems, oppressive policies, whatever. that don't necessarily replicate like the same paradigm over and over again. You don't have where you don't necessarily need to go ask the police for a permit to go march in the street at certain. Like you don't need to do that. So we can talk about this off YouTube and off this Zoom, but like that's what I think by necessity we all have to be considering are like multiple models of.
Right. Okay. Vanya?
No, I don't have anything to add. I think they said it.
Okay. Okay. Great. We had and I don't know that this is necessarily related. And there were a couple of comments that were very good about fire and burning. And one was fire clears the way for new growth. Right. And I think that's part of the point you were getting at, Dylan, when you're talking about it too, and all of you in some ways. And then it says from an indigenous or native perspective, this conversation is interesting about burning it down. First, people recognized that fire was sacred and critical to regeneration or creating something new. So, you know, the long before the Boston Tea Party or whatever else happened, right? And this one says, given the corporate entities are running a government, how effective do you think it would be to organize a national employee walkout to shake up the status quo? Could this possibly be a better way to effectuate the results needed from an economic blackout? Any thoughts?
I'll just. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Dylan.
No, just real quick. Like what this question is raising is the concept of a general strike.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're talking about. So like, hell
Right.
yes to that. Hell yes to that. And you know, I know there's been like a number of different attempts to start organizing a general strike at various scales, from regional to to national. But
Right.
but I think a general strike is exactly the kind of thing that would I think largely be unprecedented in the United States. But I think and a general strike doesn't require like every single worker to withdraw economic and activity and labor. It just requires a certain threshold for it to make a difference that makes a difference. So like we're there.
Right.
We're there. And that threshold lowers every day. Like you don't even need that many people to
Okay.
engage in it. So anyway, yeah, so yes to that.
And
Yeah.
then what's our demand? Oh, go ahead, Vanya. You had something to say.
I just was going to say the economic boycott seemed to be working too if we're looking at earnings and stuff like that for the quarters. And so I
Mhm.
think those are effective too. And I think it gets back to that point of multiple ways to attack the beast. It's not just
Right.
one way, but I definitely think, employees strike, but spending, I canceled my prime. We're not doing, and that was, I went through withdrawals. That was tough.
Yes, I'm
Um,
sure. I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazon's a tough one.
To
Marilyn.
Dylan's point about the general strike there, I always find it fascinating, like in the US when things like general strikes are happening in like Europe or like in France, which I'm telling you, if this was I mean, not to like idealize France, right? Because it is like the center of like colonial, like imperial manipulation. But like in France, if they were cutting social security, if they were firing people like this, there would be a general strike. People would be on the streets and people wouldn't do it nicely, right?
Right.
People would burn shit down, like literally, right? In
Right.
France.
Right.
And we always go, oh my God, we should do this here in the US. And then we are presented with similar situations and we slowly back up, right? So, yes, general strike. And to the question about fire, I think, it is you can think about it in terms of its destructive properties, right? So we all have seen the videos and the pictures of
Right.
Tesla cars and Cybertrucks being burnt, right? But we can also think about fire as what is motivating us, like our internal fire and our fire within our groups and within our communities to actually take action. So I think that's fire is a really interesting way of thinking about change also.
So I want to kind of wrap things up. We're approaching the 8:30 time frame. I want to thank our audience for coming and being a part. I definitely want to thank Dr. Davis, who is gone now, but stayed for quite a while because she really wanted to hear all of you, and I'm really honored, and I'm sure you are by that. And then I want to thank all of you, Vonia, Marilyn, Dylan, Yvette, for helping us to bring this conversation um, into this room and this place with people who live here and care about what happens here, because that's extremely important. And I want to, as we close, a couple of things. First, thank our sponsor, Inland Empire Community Foundation, and our partners, our community partners, right, including, Starting Over, of course, and the many other organizations that we work with. I want to close with something that Dr. Davis, I saw a quote, and she said, "I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept." And I would like to challenge anyone who is still here, which there are quite a few of you, and I really appreciate it, to reach out to the, panelists, organizations like CART and others, and get that fire. Let's make this change. We don't have to take what we're getting, but as long as we do nothing about it, this is all we will get. So thank you all very, very much for this evening. And I'm really appreciative of that. And I wish you all a good night, a wonderful weekend, and hope to see you sometime soon.